Welcome to episode 17 of Fascinating, a Star Trek podcast. The Squire of Gothos.
In this week's episode, an unexpected planet interrupts the Enterprise as it journeys towards Colony Beta 6 with much needed supplies. When Kirk and Sulu are abducted, it is Spock, fresh off a troubled attempt at command, who must rally the crew and save the day. But where did the planet come from? And what does its sole inhabitant want with the captain?
Do you mean that you actually have members of the fairer sex among your crew? Oh, how charming.
Evening, Ian.
Good evening, Gerry. How are you?
Good. I wish we had some members of the fairer sex charming us just now.
As part of our podcast team.
Yeah. We're not very diverse, are we?
We're the least diverse podcast. Well, no, in fact, we're probably one of the equal least diverse amongst 95% of the other podcast crews.
This week, what's your thoughts?
I'm not a huge fan of the Squire. Did you like him?
Yeah, he was obnoxious, but I did find him quite charismatic. Yeah, I did like him.
Okay.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I would like to have given him a bit of a beating, but
yeah,
it was fun.
It's interesting. I think this one was scheduled or recorded before last week's. I could be wrong. I think the start date's before last week's episode. But I thought it fit in quite nicely as an evolution in Spock's command. What did you think?
Well, funny you should say that. I thought there was similarities to a few previous episodes, and I found that a few times. It's maybe one of the criticisms I've got, that they seem to repeat very quickly some themes and shows. We've discussed that before. So I thought that this week you could make comparisons to last week.
Yep.
And also in terms of sort of a virtual reality planet, it was reminiscent of 2 or 3 weeks ago with Shore Leave.
Yeah.
And to answer your question, in terms of an evolution in Spock's leadership, well, I got the feeling at the start he's thinking to himself, oh, no, not again.
A little bit.
I've been put in charge here and
I've just failed at this exact thing.
I didn't like it.
I thought that the others were more receptive to him, though, and that felt like maybe it was a step on from what they'd done. People like Scotty and McCoy, who had been in the shuttlecraft with him, weren't challenging him. They accepted his orders. They didn't question his orders.
As we mentioned last week, I think that it would have been appropriate for all involved to have been reprimanded in some way. So perhaps they were pulled up. Well,
even without that, maybe they just had an honest debrief and it led to outcomes that were built upon.
Yeah, because I think, in fact, I mentioned it in my notes here, I think Kirk seems to have learned his lessons. There are a few decisions.
And it seems like the sort of leadership Kirk would show. You think he probably would get the senior staff together and let's talk about what just happened and how can we improve on this the next time.
We all made mistakes, including myself, slightly.
Well, not so much me.
No, mainly you guys.
Should we get into the episode?
Crack on.
Takeaway coffee's being handed out again on the bridge.
Yes, it's a new coffee serving yeoman and a navigator called DeSalle.
DeSalle. We'll see him again.
In this episode?
After this episode.
Doesn't die.
No, spoilers. I don't think anybody dies in this episode.
No. Kirk, as I alluded to earlier, has obviously had his backside kicked because they are on the way to the colony you mentioned, Beta 6, is it?
I think so.
With supplies, and he wants to do it in a hurry. So there's no messing about just now.
We're hitting our dates.
Let's get there with these supplies, then we can do our own thing.
Spock and McCoy, I think McCoy starts the conversation, and Kirk are talking about a space desert, essentially. There's an open area of space with no stars.
Yeah, a void, I think, is the term that's used. And Spock's ears prick up at this point.
Yeah, because they're talking about deserts on Earth, and instead of thinking of barren wastelands, as Spock thinks they should, they're thinking about oases and palm trees. And
I am entirely on Spock's side here. If you mention the word desert to me, if you call something, describe it as a desert, I do not think of...
Yeah, well, I'm reminded of standard grade, which would be, age 13, 14 here, geography. We were taught that a desert is anywhere with below a certain level of precipitation.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be hot, doesn't have to be arid.
Oh.
It just has to have less snow, because you get frozen deserts, so
Right.
the tundra, the frozen tundra is a desert, technically.
I don't think they're particularly conducive to life form.
No, there are life forms that live there.
Yeah, but there's specific ones, but generally it's not the type of place that will encourage
No, and
plants
and
and
not human life, certainly.
No.
It's very few and far between the people that live in the desert, although the listeners in Arizona might have something to say about that, or Nevada.
Yeah. In any case, Spock is not... it doesn't understand their yearning for this.
Their romantic nostalgia, I
No.
think he says. But he is very pleased to get a compliment from McCoy.
What was that?
He says he has mathematically perfect brainwaves. It's meant as an insult, but as so often, Spock takes it as a friendly compliment.
And then suddenly, there is a strange reading, which I think is verified by DeSalle.
Well, yeah, we get a bit of technobabble, but essentially there's a planet they didn't know existed, and it's there right in front of them. And Spock says that it's inconceivable that this could exist and not be recorded. And I thought it was maybe a touchback to the earlier conversation about mirages.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Anyhow, Kirk orders Sulu, just stay clear. We've got a rendezvous to make.
Again,
We're not stopping.
showing that the lesson has been learned, which is admirable.
Yeah, Sulu's response is a bit unusual.
What was that?
He kind of looks a bit dizzy, stands up, and then vanishes.
Followed immediately by Kirk himself, who wanders over to the same point.
Well, he goes to the station to implement the order, or to see what's happened, and is also vanished, which is quite rude.
And this causes Spock to call an emergency state and order reverse power.
Full reverse, and we get the credits.
Yeah, and this is the point where Spock thinks, oh no, again.
Of course it is. It's like the EastEnders drums.
So we have a Spock log, 2124.5. What does it say?
Yeah, he records most of the logs in this episode. At this point, he notes that Kirk and Sulu are missing, and he's ordered the Enterprise into orbit of the unknown planet on red alert.
And they've been there for 4 hours, I think, unsuccessfully trying to locate their 2 colleagues.
Well, this is again reminiscent of last week, although without the impairment that they had last week.
Indeed.
DeSalle wants to immediately beam. There's always, in all of these episodes, and it's not always the same person, but there's always a new officer or an officer who wants to beam down and deal with this.
Chomping
Shoot
at the
somebody.
bit. Yeah. There's always a Hawk type person,
It
isn't there?
makes you question the training.
Yeah. And we also are introduced to a Mr. Jaeger.
Jaeger.
He is now,
Jägermeister.
exactly, who is now in place of Sulu alongside this at DeSalle.
Yeah, he looks like an older officer.
Yeah, at least in his
50s.
50s, yeah.
Anyhow, he reports that there's no breathable atmosphere, and the estimated survival time if you beam down would not be very long, kind of proving the point that Spock's trying to make, that he'll decide what's happening here. It's not up to McCoy or DeSalle, to insist on being beamed down.
We should also mention that Scotty has appeared to confirm that they have searched the Enterprise twice with no sign of them, so
They're not hiding in a cupboard.
it's not a practical joke.
No. At this point, Uhura catches Spock's attention.
Yes, there is a message which has appeared on her screen in a ye olde font.
Greetings and felicitations. Send this, Lieutenant. USS Enterprise to signaler on planet's surface. Identify self. Hip, hip. Hurrah. And I believe it's pronounced tally-ho.
Some kind of a joke, sir?
I'll entertain any theories, Mr. DeSalle, any at all.
One thing is certain. Obviously, there's life on that planet.
You're quite correct, Doctor. Prepare transporter room.
Request assignment to the search party, sir.
No, Mr. Scott, neither you nor I can be spared here. Mr. DeSalle, you'll equip the landing party with full communications, armament, and life support gear. Mr. Yeager, your geophysical knowledge may be crucial down there. Dr. McCoy will accompany. If those peculiar signals are coming from Captain Kirk or Lieutenant Sulu, their rationality is in question. Dismissed.
I liked McCoy's change in attitude. So a few moments earlier, he was with DeSalle and heading straight down there and, looking to sort things out. But after the description of, or the likelihood of survival, when Spock decided that he would be going down, there's a brief shot of him looking a little bit anxious and not quite so keen now.
No, tables have turned.
Yeah.
I like the fact that Spock's leading theory at this stage is that the messages come from Kirk, but he's crazy now.
Yeah, it's not the first assumption you would make, is it?
No, it's a really weird message as well. Even thinking about what happens in this episode, thinking about the Squire. Why has he sent this message? He's, I think, looking to tempt them down to the planet's surface.
Yeah.
But why? Because he could just bring them down himself. He's already done that.
Can he bring them all down?
I don't know. But I think he's playing some kind of game.
Yeah, but we know that he does like games.
He does.
Messing around. The little tyke that he is.
Oh, yeah. Down in the transporter room, Scotty's going to beam the team to the surface, and they have orders to make contact with the ship immediately on landing, and if required, to use this little laser pointer thing.
Yeah. Also like the fact they're wearing these little oxygen masks.
Yeah, we think back to The Naked Time when Spock and Tormolin were down to the surface. They had full hazmat suits on. So obviously they felt like they were going to be kicking about the planet a wee bit longer this time. They probably didn't want to have them in these orange outfits for half an hour. Yeah,
but on the planet they arrive, and McCoy immediately has a dig at Jaeger about the lack of danger. Apparently, because Jaeger was the one who was describing the...
This is what McCoy was doing last week. It's like people have perfectly reasonable, logical assumptions based on data. Things turn out to be different, and McCoy's like, told you.
Yeah.
It's not very professional.
It's not at all. I think when they arrive, is it Jaeger? He carries out with his little tricorder some tests.
Yes.
And they confirm that for the rest of the episode, they don't need to wear these little masks.
So they just get rid of them much more easily than they would get rid of a hazmat suit.
Indeed.
DeSalle can't communicate with the ship, so he's going to go and use his laser pointer somewhere else.
He tries to. I think it was quite nice as well how they were all trying to communicate and they couldn't get a signal, and it's very reminiscent of a situation you find yourself in these days.
Yeah, my phone doesn't work, so I'll try mine. It doesn't work.
So yeah, what happens? DeSalle goes, it takes 3 or 4 steps around the corner and immediately is faced with a castle.
That must have been visible.
Yeah.
From where they were, surely. Maybe there's an implied distance here that's not just round the corner.
I think that's a bit of a trope that I've noticed in Star Trek. Obviously, for the obvious reasons, that the sets are quite limited and it's in a soundstage. But yeah, they do tend to walk around the corner.
Yes, and see things that theoretically must have been visible. Yeah.
So they're at the castle, all 3, with their phasers drawn, and they enter to find it lit with torches and furnished with items including busts of Napoleon and Caesar.
Did you get the little Easter egg?
What was that?
The salt vampire from episode 1, the man trap.
Nope.
That was obviously McCoy's ex-girlfriend.
Yeah.
And when he sees it, he does a double take.
Ah, right.
You have to go back and watch that. That was really good.
I will.
I loved that.
There are suits of armour, flags, and an organ, amongst other things.
Yeah, and something that's kind of half bird, half woman in tights, which I think is from The Cage. Anyhow, they also see Sulu and Kirk frozen in place.
Well, you say frozen.
Well, they're doing it themselves.
Yes, they're trying to act frozen. They couldn't even take a still shot in the camera.
No, and their colours have been changed though, so there's some special effect going on.
I think it's a light. But yeah, if you watch, they're moving all over the shop.
Not the first time or the last time. It is the first, but not the last time it happens in this episode.
So McCoy uses his tricorder again, but it gives off no reading, and he claims that they are like waxworks.
But moving. They hear somebody, or we hear somebody come in behind them and shut the door.
Yeah, before they can make any sort of decision, they are faced with a cheeky little rapscallion bashing out a medieval ditty on the organ.
I'm not sure it's medieval, but
is it not? Whatever.
It's early modern.
All right.
I guess.
Pre-Baroque?
Something around. I know it might even be post-Baroque.
Okay.
Certainly, he's playing his harpsichord anyway, and not hiding.
A harpsichord, is it?
Yeah.
Not an organ?
No, it's a harpsichord.
Is it?
Yeah. It makes a different sound.
Isn't harpsichord a type of organ?
No.
All right.
Okay.
As he can... Well, I've described it as organ.
It's like a predecessor to the piano.
Okay.
Which then led to the organ.
Right. As he continues to play, he acknowledges the new arrivals and unfreezes their crewmates, which he describes as an exquisite pair.
Yeah, he says they'll want them back now.
When was the last time you described something as an exquisite pair?
I can't remember.
All right.
I feel like it wasn't that long ago.
Mm-hmm. It was earlier today myself. I had a fruit bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
McCoy quickly brings Kirk up to speed, and Kirk then obviously takes over command of the landing party.
Yes, after they have been welcomed to his planet of Gothos.
Yes, well, Kirk asks Trelane who he is and where he's come from, and he explains that he's a retired general, gives them his name, and says he's at their service before resuming his music.
Did you mention his name?
Yes, I said he speaks to Trelane.
Okay.
Yeah, at the start of the sentence, that's why I didn't repeat it.
Ah, right, okay.
Do you want to have overkill here?
No.
Jaeger makes an interesting observation.
What was that?
Well, he talks about the time period being about 900 years in the past. I think he's wrong.
Yeah.
It's more like 450 years from where they're meant to be. But anyway, he makes the point that if you looked to Earth through a telescope from here, given the distance in light years, that was the period you would be able to see, which is quite clever. That's true. You get that even now. You know, if you certain telescopes, we can look far enough away. You can still see the echoes of the Big Bang if you look far enough in the distance.
Yeah, Physics 101.
Basic stuff. I like the images. There's images you get of the immediate aftermath of the Big Bang. I've seen they're quite nice, colourful.
I think there's also a discussion as well between DeSalle and Kirk. I think DeSalle mentions that communications are still down, and they're not overly concerned at this point, but I think Kirk certainly realises they're trapped.
Kirk picks up on Jaeger's point about the time gap and tries to explain to Trelane that he's made a mistake and that this is not how Earth would appear today.
Oh, really? If I made an error in time? How fallible of me. Oh, I did so want to make you feel at home. I'm quite proud of the detail.
General Trelane.
Retired, sir. Just Squire Trelane now. And you may call me Squire. Yes, I rather fancy that.
For what purpose have you imprisoned us here?
Imprisoned? Nonsense. You're my guests. You see, I just finished my studies of your curious and fascinating society. You came by at the most propitious moment. I want to know all about your campaigns, your battles, your missions of conquest.
Our missions are peaceful, not for conquest. When we do battle, it is only because we have no choice.
But that's the official story, eh?
I must ask you to let us go back to our ship.
Oh, I wouldn't hear of it. You shall join me in a repast. I want to learn all about your feelings on war and killing and conquest, that sort of thing. Do you know that you're one of the few predator species that preys even on itself?
So this creates some unrest, and Kirk has to tell DeSalle to set his phaser for stun for the time being.
Yes, and on hearing DeSalle's name, Trelane is intrigued.
Yeah, he starts talking to him in French, and then he starts mentioning his respect for Napoleon.
Yes, before moving through the rest of the crew, and Sulu thinks he's been hit with a racial stereotype.
Does he?
Yeah.
What was that?
I can't remember. I think he calls him an honourable gentleman, and I think Sulu takes offence.
Okay. He spoke to Jaeger like Basil Fawlty and the Germans.
Yeah, yes, the controversial Fawlty Towers episode. Yeah, he says he must be a German soldier, and then he says something along the lines of, "Let's go with the gun."
Right.
Which Jaeger doesn't respond to. He says, "I'm a scientist, not a soldier."
He then turns and admires his uniform in the mirror. So seeing an opportunity, DeSalle raises his phaser but is caught by Trelane, who freezes him for a few seconds so that he can remove his weapon.
He does. He investigates the weapon and sees it has a couple of settings, one that will kill and one that will stun.
Yeah, it's quite sinister.
Yeah.
The way he looks and fondles and ponders the power of it. I think he says that he uses it in a few of his statues to blow them up.
Yeah, I think one of them was the Salt Vampire.
Right, and then he claims that it could kill millions.
Yes, he marvels at its destructive capability.
However, he doesn't stop Kirk taking it back from him and laughs at the suggestion they are next on his hit list, claiming they are typical humans who fear what they don't understand.
Yes, he's irritated, I think, by Kirk's concern for his crew, because he doesn't think he's given them a basis to worry. But he obviously has. Yeah,
he's not read the situation very well.
No.
He then goes on to anticipate and answers Kirk's next question by explaining that he and others like him have developed a sophisticated system that can apparently turn energy into matter and then back again.
Yeah, Kirk asks whether it's like their transporters, and I think Trelane says that the transporter would be a very primitive version of the technology.
Mm-hmm. So from this we learn that he can move things from place to place. But he's not interested. I think Kirk tries to ask him more questions and engage with him, but he doesn't want to get bogged down in this.
No, it's irritating to him. He gives Kirk a sample of the planet's atmosphere to calm him down a little bit.
Yeah, I think his mask slips when Kirk tries to walk away.
Yeah.
He tells him they can't go, and this sample, or this demonstration of his authority is revealed how...
Well, we see Kirk outside the bubble, as it were, in the toxic atmosphere that was described at the start of the episode, and then brought back coughing and choking.
Yeah, and quite a bit of distress.
Yeah, looks like he's a full dose of the toxic atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Trelane tells him to behave now, or he'll be very, very angry. He does have this underlying ominous...
Yeah, sort of malice.
Spot log 2125.7. It's their 14th unsuccessful orbit.
They're getting dizzy.
Although they have apparently found a small, stable area on the planet, so it must be this section they're in.
This is ridiculous. You know why it's ridiculous?
Why?
They've already beamed people down. Just look at the section where you beamed the people down.
Good point.
Anyway.
Illogical, as Spock.
He's not thought it through. He's thought, just ignore this place that we started beaming people down to and look at the rest of the planet.
Back up on the bridge, Scotty is puzzled by this patch of cam. But Spock has no explanation for it, although he wants the sensors to be fine-tuned to it with a view of transporting up any living beings from that particular area.
Worth a shot.
Now, for once here, Scotty is less than positive. In my experience, he's always been a very much a sort of can-do type chap, even under...
Well, no, I think Scotty has a habit of exaggerating how difficult things are so that he looks good when he does them. So he says, this will take 24 hours, and he does it in 2 hours. Or he says, it can't be fixed, like the transporters in The Enemy Within.
Yeah.
Can't be fixed. Next scene, Scotty's fixed it.
Yeah, fair enough. But in this case, he insists that it's basically a shot in the dark.
Yeah, well, it is. But I think Spock knows that. I don't think Spock has the expectation that this is definitely going to fix the problem. I think he just wants to give it a go. It's a thing that might work.
Sure.
And there's not... Well, the downside would be they might beam up something dangerous.
A tiger.
Yeah, or some sort of toxic plant life.
Or a monkey with a knife.
That would be really unfortunate. It would be a great episode.
Back down on Gothos, Trelane is showing off his acquired battle flags and his morbid fascination with Earth wars and death.
Yes, and Kirk's team are starting to put the pieces together. McCoy notes that Trelane has no life signs. Jaeger notes that the fire isn't hot. And I think one of them, in fact, maybe it's not at this point, they note that there's no food yet, is there?
Yeah.
And later on they note that the food has no taste.
Mm-hmm. So from this they deduce that this person isn't... It's quite a... There are a couple of times they leap here.
It's one of the things that you've criticised before. Kirk makes a logical assumption, or a leap in logic.
Yeah.
And assumes that, together with the error in the time period, this suggests that Trelane is fallible. And there must be a source to his power.
See, that's... Assuming he's fallible, that's an obvious assumption. I mean, you wouldn't assume that everyone...
Mistakes, yeah, he's not omnipotent, yeah.
But the power source, I thought, that wouldn't be my first...
Yeah, in fact, is it later that they make the assumption about the power source? I'm not even sure if they make that specific point at this. Because there's two really similar moments in the episode.
Yeah, it might be later, but I don't think there's much more evidence that would justify it later on.
And they turn it to be wrong, in fact, when they make that assumption. But we'll get to that point. At this point...
Well, Trelane is back on the keyboard now.
Okay.
While this is happening.
Yes, and he's resisting the idea of returning them to the Enterprise. But he is intrigued to hear... and possibly it's what we heard at the top of the episode, that there are women on the Enterprise. Yeah,
indeed. He's his pecker is up.
Tenderized. He is very much of the opinion that those women should be brought down to amuse him.
And I think this oversteps the mark for Kirk, who grabs his arm and tells him the game has gone on for too long now.
At this, McCoy reports that he is receiving some kind of transporter signal. I don't know whether his communicator's made a chirp of some kind. But Kirk credits Spock for their imminent escape, and Trelane looks frustrated.
Yeah, he's not. He's protesting. He won't have it if the crew are beamed back up.
It was too soon.
Come on, guys, play fair.
Up in the transporter room, Kirk checks in with Spock, and the fact that Trelane has not arrived with them shows that he is not what they would classify as a life form.
Yeah, Kirk has no time for pleasantries at this point. He wants to know how the scans got through this radiation field. And Spock explains about the little area, little sort of safety area. And at this point again, I think we see Kirk not wanting to mess around anymore.
Rapid escape is what he wants, a retreat perhaps?
Yeah, well, prepare for max warp out of there.
Max warp. He never uses that phrase again, I'm sure. Maximum warp.
We're up on the bridge. The new yeoman
makes a stupid comment. Unprofessional, personal comment about how worried she is about Kirk. It's almost, they all make these stupid simpering comments.
No, it's frustrating. It's almost as if they want to build upon or start the potential of a relationship with each time.
And even if you're assuming it's written for Rand, which we don't know this one was, but maybe it was, it's annoying if she says it as well.
Yeah.
Why does she's a professional. Each of these yeomen are professionals. They're on here doing a job of work. They don't need to be personally concerned for the captain because he's missing. 6 of them are missing. You've never been seen in this episode before. You've just shown up. You've just replaced the woman from the last episode who was perfectly fine herself and also simpering about things. Why are they written this way? The men aren't written this way. You don't see... Well, we do a wee bit see Spock and Kirk have this affection for one another.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of the last episode, and I think at other points.
Sherlock and Watson.
But you don't see Scotty and McCoy, telling each other how worried they were that one of them was missing, or Sulu and DeSalle.
They're men.
Well, this is it. Why are the women written in this way?
It's the 60s.
It's frustrating.
McCoy at this point claims he is quaking either with laughter or terror as Uhura asks about Gothos, and he tries to explain what they found before just giving up.
Yeah, and they're rudely interrupted shortly thereafter.
By whom?
Trelane.
Yeah, he appears on the bridge.
He's mad at Spock.
Asks where all the weapons are.
Yeah, he wants to know why they're not on display, hanging on the walls and stuff.
Tell me about Spock, yeah.
Yeah, because Kirk identified Spock as the one that was rescuing them, Trelane has developed a personal grudge against the Vulcan. Again, it's a little bit of sort of bigotry here, isn't it? You can't believe someone, I think it's of mixed race, could be in charge. Is that what it says? Yeah, well, he's getting his... this makes no sense though either, because, okay, he's been observing Earth. Well, I suppose, yes, he thinks this in the context of this being an Earth ship. Why are they not treating people of mixed race the way that people of mixed race were treated on Earth 400 or 500 years ago? Yeah, if you look at it like that. But he's already had his error pointed out to him. Yeah, but he hasn't had any... Yeah, but he's not had any... Re-education. Yeah, or additional education. He asks Kirk to punish Spock, but Kirk refuses. In fact, he commends Spock for his actions. Mm-hmm. Says it's exactly what he would want him to have done. I also like to hear Spock's response when he remarks that the Vulcan race is not generally predatory. And there's a little eyebrow raise at this point, but there are exceptions. Of course. He's not a pushover. No, and he's not going to take it. Kirk tells Trelane to leave, but he is of the view that they're all coming with him. Yes, he's got a gathering planned, and they shan't spoil it for him. Yes, he reminds me a little bit of Charlie Evans. Yeah. With his immaturity and power. He's got a bit more control over his power, a bit more knowledge about his power, but he's got the same urges, especially when he talks about women. It's childlike, want attitude, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's exactly what you'd expect Charlie to grow up to be like in 5 years' time. Yeah. So we're back down in Gothos, and before anything else can be said, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Sulu, DeSalle, Jaeger are all down there with him in his castle. And DeSalle's frozen again as he tries to attack Trelane, who is amused at his savagery. Yes, but he does also warn them not to provoke him further. Yeah, I think he lets him go after taking their phasers. I think he's at the point that, this is my game, we're playing my rules, and if you don't play by my rules, I'm picking up my ball and I'm going to beat you with it. Sure. He pseudo-graciously says that he will forget their rude behaviour and invites them to dine and drink, which after a nod from their captain, they all do. Well, they certainly sit down to partake. week.
And at this, we see that Ahura and Yeoman Ross have also been brought down, and Trelane presents himself before addressing them with his own unique style and assumptions.
You've been quite derelict in your social duties, Captain. You haven't introduced me to the charming contingent of your crew.
This is General Trelane.
Retired. But if you prefer, you may address me as the lonely Squire of Gothos, dear ladies.
Lieutenant Ahura of Communications.
A Nubian prize. Taken on one of your raids of conquest, no doubt, Captain?
No doubt.
She has the melting eyes of the Queen of Sheba, the same lovely coloring. And this? Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium? Fair Helen, make me immortal with a kiss.
Yeoman Teresa Ross. I believe you have met our science officer, Mr. Spock.
You do realize, don't you, that it's in deference to the captain that I brought you here?
Affirmative.
Well, I don't know if I like your tone. It's most challenging. Is that what you're doing, challenging me?
I object to you. I object to intellect without discipline. I object to power without constructive purpose.
Oh, Mr. Spock, you do have one saving grace after all. You're ill-mannered. The human half of you, no doubt. Come, my little wood nymph. Won't you dance with your sway? Give us some sprightly music, my dear girl.
Oh, I don't know how to play this.
Of course you do.
Yeah,
Nubian prize, we should address that. I don't think that was a racist term. I think when he talks about her lovely colouring.
yeah, but she's not Nubian, is she?
So, well, Nubia, I think that is around about the Egypt-Sudan border, so North African.
Yeah.
She's,
So he's
she
made
speaks
a
Swahili at other points. So I don't think that fits. I don't think that fits.
just generally you wouldn't be using that sort of pattern these days. You shouldn't be using that.
When he talks about her lovely colouring, it reminded me of, if you've seen Book of Mormon, and
No.
I'm sure some folk listening will have, there's a good scene where Elder Cunningham goes to a village in Uganda and he meets a girl called Nabalungi, who he calls various names like Neutrogena or whatever, he can't
All
say
right,
it.
yeah.
But he likes her colouring. He says she's like a latte. It just made me think of that.
So as a confused Ahura plays on the harpsichord,
Under Trelane's influence, because he's magically taught her how to do so in an instant.
yes, and he is dancing with Ross, and Sulu asks for how long they have to pander to him. Even Sulu's getting a bit.
Well, he thought the guy was rude to him earlier. He doesn't like him.
Kirk tells him that until they can think of a solution, they have to wait, and in the meantime, to enjoy the hospitality. It looks as if McCoy already had. He's standing there with his large brandy.
Well, yes, but then this is the point. I think I touched on this earlier, where McCoy notes that the brandy has no flavour, the food doesn't taste of anything, and we also get a good line from Spock where he explains why he uses the word fascinating and why this isn't fascinating.
So tell me why.
Well, I think he uses fascinating for things that are completely unexpected and worthy of an eyebrow, whereas this is merely interesting.
Wonder if the brandy, whilst tasteless, would still get you drunk.
Well, yeah, I guess it depends on how he's formulated it. I presume not. If he's not worked out the taste, he probably hasn't worked out the alcohol
Sure.
content. And I think on the Enterprise they all drink synthetic alcohol most of the time, apart from when they get into McCoy's locked cupboard.
Mm-hmm.
Get the Romulan ale or the Saurian brandy. I think we've had that before, haven't we?
I think we have. I think it's. I think Trelane's described as understanding the theory of Earth forms, but has no experience at all, so therefore lacks substance.
Yeah, and this is where they start to theorise about him having mechanical help of some kind. They note that he never strays far from his mirror. Obviously, apart from when he was on the Enterprise, which they've completely forgotten. And they think that there's maybe some way to defeat him.
Yeah, again, this would have been easy to write, and he could have noticed something or heard something, or you could have pointed out how he was. I don't know. Like, you could have made it. It's too much of a leap for Kirk to be believable.
Yeah, but also he's wrong, so that's good, because quite often he makes these ridiculous leaps and they're right.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see him make a mistake in this way.
Trelane is still dancing with Ross, but considers her uniform inappropriate and changes it to match his style as Ahura continues to play and seems to be having some fun. I think she's enjoying the fact that she can play.
She likes the music, and I think she likes having this new skill.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk, I think, deliberately starts to build up a challenge to Trelane at this point.
Yes, there's a marble rolling in Kirk's mind, and he wonders, firstly, if the type of machine needed to control this environment could be held within the house.
Yes, this is where we talk about the mirror.
Yeah, Spock says no, and at this Kirk thinks he's got a plan to turn off this power source. So, as you mentioned, he insults Trelane.
Yeah, he talks about Ross not being dressed appropriately. She's working. She shouldn't be in this sort of get-up. He takes her glove from her, and then he challenges Trelane to a duel.
Yes, a challenge that is readily accepted as he unboxes his pistol set and gives one to Kirk with the warning that he never misses.
Yes, and he refers to the heroic Alexander Hamilton. Interesting one, although I think that again puts his dates out.
Mm-hmm.
I think Hamilton was, early 19th century?
Really?
1800s, or is it 1700s?
Yeah.
Either way, it's way out from the 900 years that was getting talked about.
Captain's log. Or is it a Spock log?
It's Kirk. It's a delayed report, so he's obviously plugged this one in after the event.
Yep, 2126.1. It's a recap, and he makes a point that their only hope is his one chance with the pistol.
He should, when he's doing these delayed reports that he's plugging back into the story, he should use more sort of hindsight and prescience. He was like, this is when I decided to make my move. The little lady didn't know what was going to happen.
They stand apart with the fascinated Trelane in front of his mirror. However, things take a turn when he insists that his rules mean that he gets a shot first rather than at the same time. That's not how a duel works. You're just saying, I want to be able to shoot you in the face.
Yes. But he has another plan.
What's that?
He shoots the ceiling, which I think is a deliberate... I think in dueling that's got a name when you deliberately miss your first shot.
Really?
Yeah. It's almost like you're challenging the other person, saying you don't think they can hit you.
Okay.
But I don't know what the name
From
of it
that
is.
distance with a gun.
Yeah, it's bold.
Very bold.
Either you don't think they can or you don't think they will, perhaps.
Yeah.
So Kirk then has his opportunity.
Yes, well, obviously banking that Kirk would not murder him, he is shocked when a shot is fired at the mirror.
He's even more shocked that has been figured out as the source of all his power. Well, not the source of all his power, as we find out, but certainly there's a device there that amplifies or makes things easier for him.
Yeah. So the mirror has exploded in smoke and flames, and we see this machine behind it.
So that part of their assumption, ludicrous as it was correct.
Mm-hmm.
The assumption, though, that this was the source of all his powers was wrong.
At this, the lights dim, but communications are improved, and Kirk tells DeSalle to attempt to contact the Enterprise.
You say that like it's surprising. Imagine getting better communications with less lights. How could that be possible? They can't even see the devices. Anyhow, yes, they get in touch with the Enterprise and Kirk orders an evacuation.
Yeah. He goes on to tell Trelane that it's over, he's finished. But the Defiant One claims his wrath has now been earned, and that they have to return to their ship and prepare to die, especially the captain.
So back up on the bridge, we see Yeoman Ross still in her outfit. She's very fortunate that wasn't one of the things that stopped working from the projection.
Oh, yeah. What would happen?
Who knows? Would she have her uniform back on, or would she be...
Maybe that just goes over
exposed?
the top of the uniform.
She might be safe either way. But anyway, Kirk tells her to turn in her glass slippers because the ball is over. He's getting quite cocky.
Yeah, it's a bit of charm, a bit of banter.
Yeah, just like winning her over, even though she's already obsessed, as we learned earlier, for no reason.
Yeah. On the screen as well, we find out there is no sign of pursuit, and instruments are functioning quite normally.
Yes, Sulu's ready to take them to warp, but suddenly the planet's back in front of them.
Yeah, and they only just managed to miss hitting it. There's a heavy pull to the left, or whatever it is, starboard port.
One on the sides, yeah.
Port's the left, I think.
Who knows?
I do.
Well, lots of folk know, yeah. Anyhow, yes, Sulu confirms that they were on the correct course, but the planet won't get out their way. So.
Yes, this occurs several times. So, I mean, it basically appears like the planet is following them.
Yeah, it's almost jumping.
Yeah, almost like the Romulan weapon in Balance of Terror.
Yeah, I don't think it was jumping around so much as following them, but yeah, the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk makes a new decision.
Well, he's angry now.
Yes, he orders Sulu to take the Enterprise into orbit of the planet. He's going to head down and sort this out.
Yeah, resolve it once and for all. And if he doesn't return in 1 hour, they have to leave orbit and not turn back. I didn't understand this. That was the whole point. They can't do that. So how he's telling?
Well, I think he's assuming that he'll be able to distract the Squire. So even if he can't defeat him, he might have distracted him enough that the Enterprise will be able to get away.
Why would you assume that? You don't know what you've got to
do. If you can get away, get away.
Yeah. Back down in Gothos, Kirk is surprised to be addressed as the prisoner.
Things have changed. They're no longer in this antiquated drawing room. It's now a court.
With Trelane behind a judge's bench and wearing the robes and the wig.
This, I think, you can draw a straight line. I'll come back to this in the trivia. You can draw a straight line between this scene and the premiere of Star Trek The Next Generation.
Okay.
And I'll talk about it a little bit in the trivia section.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I think there's a definite connection.
And also, the wig would be part of the British judiciary or judicial system. So if he'd been watching, who is he watching?
Well, see, there's a story behind this. So initially he had a French wig and he complained about it being too big, too long, awkward. And William Shatner thought he's making a fuss about nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And the director was concerned. He didn't want to upset William Shatner, his star, but he thought perhaps Campbell had a point. So he referred it to the producer, Gene Kuhn, who we'll talk about later, and he decided in Campbell's favour. It's not really against Shatner, it's just I think Shatner thought this was holding things up too much. They had I think they already were a day over, they ended up being a day over with the shoot, so things were done to a tight schedule, and Shatner obviously had a feeling of responsibility to that. He didn't want them to end up 3 episodes down the line being 2 or 3 days behind and having to work nights or whatever else, so he was quite keen to progress, but the producer had the change of wig implemented, so it's a more British style judicial wig that he's wearing in the scene, even though it's a French court essentially that he's been observing.
Sure. More worryingly for Kirk, a shadow of a noose appears behind him, and it looks like his life is now in real danger from this crazy.
Yes, but he's still not inclined to play along.
No, until Trelane proceeds to read out the charges against him.
And now, Captain James Kirk, you stand accused of the high crime of treason against a superior authority, conspiracy, and the attempt to foment insurrection. How do you plead?
I haven't come to plead in your court, Trelane.
I warn you, anything you might say has already been taken down in evidence against you.
I've come for one purpose, to get back my ship.
Irrelevant.
We've made you angry with our will to survive, have we?
Uncalled for.
Then vent your anger on me alone. I was the one that led the others. I was the one that shot out your mirror machine.
And did you really think that was the only medium of instrumentality at my command?
I took that chance. I'm willing to pay the price for chancing wrong.
Oh, then you do admit to the charge.
Yes! Anything. Just allow the Enterprise to continue its journey. You pompous...
Immaterial!
Those people have done you no harm.
Inadmissible!
We're living beings, not playthings for your amusement.
Silence! This trial is over. You are guilty. On all counts, you are guilty. And according to your own laws, this court has no choice in fixing punishment. You will hang by the neck, Captain, until you are dead, dead, dead.
During that clip there, I was reminded of The Great Oz.
Were you?
From The Wizard of Oz. Just the style, the way he was talking, maybe even the accent.
Okay.
From the movie.
The punishment that he hands down wasn't very French either, was it? There's no guillotine. So I think an American, maybe British, hang by the neck.
But 900 years ago when he was watching, maybe the guillotine wasn't.
450, maybe 500. I still think the French would be more classy than that. Maybe they did hang some people, I don't know. It was the phrasing that he used was very sort of British legal. You know, you're taken from this place to another place.
Yeah.
All that sort of thing. He didn't put his black cap on.
No. Spot log 2126.3. Time is almost up and he will need to leave.
If he can.
Back down in the court, Trelane has switched personality again and now admits at being pleased to have just experienced some rage and calls it a successful experiment. So at that point, Kirk might be thinking, okay, is that all it was? Just an experiment? Him playing?
But no, Kirk is still to be hung to death. So he starts to taunt Trelane.
How?
He calls him out on finding everything too easy. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He's a bumbling, inept fool.
He's very easy to manipulate.
Trelane?
Yeah.
To an extent.
He goes on to push his buttons by saying that he can't enjoy any experience he creates, like the rage, and he needs Kirk to achieve these feelings.
Yeah, and that hanging would be unsatisfactory. He wouldn't take any real pleasure from that. He needs something better.
And this strategy seems to be working when he intrigues him with the concept of terror and the sport of murder. Not this simple, easy stuff.
No. He wants to, or at least I think Trelane is manipulated into coming up with the idea of a royal hunt.
Yes, a one-on-one conflict.
Yes, and Kirk then is able to negotiate his own terms for this hunt.
Which are?
That if Trelane wins, he can obviously kill Kirk, but Kirk wants the Enterprise released, no matter what.
Yeah, so we're outside in the forest, ready to begin the chase. Kirk communicates up to the Enterprise and warns it to get away now. He's buying them some time.
Yeah, it's not clear though that he's got through. There's no response from the Enterprise.
But why would he think that having this conversation is in some way released this force?
Well, it's all a bit confused because there's no indication initially that he thought the Enterprise was being prevented from leaving.
Yeah.
And then, like we talked about earlier on, and then he still requests that it be like, so I suppose he's aware that Trelane could stop it, so he wants him to promise not to stop it. Mm-hmm. But why does he need to communicate to tell him to leave when they've already got orders to leave?
But the point was that the prize for the victor, or if
no, it's not the prize for the victor. It's in exchange for Kirk taking part.
Ah, okay.
The Enterprise should be allowed to leave.
Sure.
But it doesn't seem that Trelane's really letting him communicate here.
No, because as he's trying to have this conversation, he appears with a sword which he swings at him and the chase commences.
Yes. At some point, Kirk does manage to disarm Trelane, but there's a lot of running away going on, and Trelane can't be harmed because he can just disappear and reappear when you swing a sword at him.
Yeah. So realising the weapon is useless, Kirk throws it away, only for his adversary to magic it back and chase him with it again. And after running about and fighting, Kirk finds himself at the locked castle door.
There's no way in.
No.
There's no way to escape from this situation.
When Trelane turns up, he finds himself caged to the left and the right. There's barriers now. So he's trapped in front of the door.
Where did they come from?
Trelane magicked them.
That's really, really rude.
Mm-hmm.
Trelane doesn't stop there with his rudeness. He's changing the rules. He no longer wants to let the Enterprise leave. He's had fun beating Kirk, and he's going to bring the others down and beat them as well.
He's at it.
Yeah, well, he thinks that he is omnipotent in this situation. He doesn't think the others can harm him.
He orders Kirk to his knees, but he refuses in defiance and says that he's won nothing, and grabs the sword and breaks over his knee before giving the Tyke a couple of slaps to the cheek. That reminded me of Blueprint for Murder, Columbo.
Right.
A little backhander.
He gives Trelane a lesson as well, or a lecture. It might be about winning, and says he's a lot to learn about being a winner as Trelane becomes more and more angry.
Yeah, about to stamp his feet, I think.
Yeah, Kirk tells him he's a lot to learn about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Trelane doesn't really accept this advice. He thinks he's won and that Kirk isn't worth listening to.
And then it all gets a little bit weird.
Yeah, Kirk wakes up and it was all a dream. Actually, that would have been better.
Yeah, in the shower.
Yeah, this is maybe the worst ending to an episode so far.
It seems a bit of a... It's like the dream ending. You can't think of something to write. You can't think of an obvious way, so you just create... It's a... What is it? Ex Machina or something?
Yeah, we've had this before. I'm trying to think which episode it was. I think it was Shore Leave, where I was dissatisfied at the ending because Kirk and the crew didn't resolve anything. Mm-hmm. Okay, Kirk has figured out this being as young, But he's been defeated. Trelane has power to end his life if he wants, or to keep him trapped there permanently. And then something else, like the caretaker on that occasion, and these green blobs on this occasion show up and Deus Ex Machina it all away.
Yeah, so, just quickly summarise what happens here.
So these two green blobs apparently are the parents, or at least the people responsible
Authority
for
figures.
Trelane, or not people, whatever they are. They're responsible for Trelane. And they chastise him as he becomes increasingly irrational and petulant, yes, childish, and he has his protestations going, and they tell him if he can't take proper care of his pets, he can't have them, but would.
Yeah.
And although they do say that the humans and Vulcans and whoever else is on the Enterprise are superior beings, that, at least, near their level of intellect, not equivalent to them, because I think they're seen as lesser, that's why they're referred to as pets, but still worthy of respect at least, and of being treated humanely. It's just, the whole thing's a bit daft.
Yeah. And as he is trying to plead his case, he eventually sort of dissolves.
Yeah, they've taken him away, I believe. And then they apologise to Kirk and say that if we'd realised you were vulnerable, we would have dealt with this a bit sooner and not let him do this.
Yeah, and they tell him that they'll ensure that he can return safely to his ship.
Sure. So Kirk contacts Spock and is transported back to the ship, and presumably the planet then goes back to being entirely inhospitable. Mm-hmm. Maybe put back where it came from.
But does the planet
actually
exist?
Real?
No,
well,
because that's the whole point at the start. Spock says he can't believe that there's no record of it. So it would suggest that there isn't a record because it doesn't exist and he's created it.
Well,
and in fact, during that conversation...
He talks about being the parents giving him the planet to play with. So whether they give it to him in a specific location and he's moved it, or whether it's essentially a toy that doesn't exist normally, doesn't really matter, I don't suppose.
No. We're back up in the bridge. They're approaching colony Beta 6 when Spock asks how he should describe Trelane in his record. Yeah,
Kirk, a little bit facetiously, I think, suggests God of War.
But Spock doesn't think that is particularly fitting.
No. So they replace it with he's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy.
Exactly.
Essentially, I think that is what Kirk is saying there.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he stole it from Monty Python or they stole it from him. When was Life of Brian made? 70s?
Oh, after this, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe this was the inspiration. Because that is almost literally word for word what they use.
Without a doubt. And we finish, I think, with Kirk playing down Trelane's behaviour and saying the type of attitude or type of pranks that Spock no doubt played when he was a kid himself.
Yes, Spock looks incredulous and Kirk apologises for even thinking that was possible. And that's the end. Do you think Spock was at it there?
No, I think Spock got the joke.
Yeah, so you think he was playing with Kirk a little bit?
I do.
Yeah, I thought that as well. I don't think Spock was a good boy at all, especially when he's half human. He surely needed time to learn to control his emotions. I'm sure even Vulcan children need time to learn to control their emotions. They won't be born unemotional.
Quite
well, then are emotions learned? Is there a sort of, who knows?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, not a qualified one anyway, but I think, if you're brought up in a certain type of family, perhaps one that is loud and it shows emotions, we're a very shouty family.
You are?
Yeah, my wife doesn't, she can't, whenever I go through it, whenever I go through it with my parents, we sort of shout at each other and we can't have a conversation.
Is that the Hamilton in you?
Yeah. And she sees it in the kids growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's not happy.
No. Okay, so what do you think then? How do you look back on that one? Do you think you'd like to see the Squire again? Think he could be a recurring villain?
I would like that. He is, he's irritating, but endearing in the same time. I wouldn't want him as a regular every week. I wouldn't want him on the bridge.
No.
But I could take a little bit more.
A bit of the Harry Mudds about him.
Yeah.
I think Kirk tried to deal with him the way that he dealt with Harry Mudd to a certain extent.
Sure.
Just Harry Mudd doesn't have the same sort of power.
No.
So I'll talk a little bit about the connection I mentioned. So in the first episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, they come across this omnipotent creature who can manipulate space and time and everything, or at least appear to. And he's called Q.
Right.
And he's from a species called the Q.
Okay.
And I think even the actor John Delancey, who you'll have heard of, who plays Q, is of the view that Trelane was the forerunner. So, and there's a courtroom scene in that episode as well where Q puts humanity on trial.
Can I make a James Bond joke now?
No, it's a different Q.
Right.
So I think you could retcon Trelane as a young Q, and I think that in fact there's novelizations where that does happen. So maybe he was a Q and they just hadn't finalised that. Maybe he's meant to be of the same species. The Q annoyed me. I didn't like Q. I liked John Delancey, but I didn't like that character. There were a couple of good episodes that he was in, but there was too many of them and they were too silly. It's a bit like computer games where...
Are you still talking about Next Generation here?
Yeah.
Why? I don't know what you're talking about.
It's all the same.
I know, but I've no idea what you're going on about here.
Okay, well, I'm going to explain.
Right.
It's a bit like in some computer games and certain stories where characters are overpowered, and we talked about it with Charlie X as well, where there's no limit, it becomes boring. You know.
I know I know how you feel.
Yeah. It's not a good...
Are you criticising Next Generation here?
No, I'm criticising characters like Trelane,
right,
who have too much power. There's no, and like Charlie X, there's no sensible way or reasonable way for Kirk and the crew to deal with them.
That's right. You got any trivia for us this week, Iain?
I've got loads of trivia.
Right, go on about it, come on.
This is what I'm talking about.
Alright. No, this is your opinion, it's not trivia.
Well, my opinion's based on the trivia.
Tell me who the actors are.
No, I'll tell you the original air date, 12th of January 1967.
Right.
Director Don McDougall.
Oh, big Donny D.
Didn't do any more episodes. He did other shows like $6 Million Man, Dukes of Hazzard, Amazing Spider-Man, which is comical in its ways of depicting Spider-Man, not the animated one, the live action one.
Listen, I don't know anything about that either. I'm rocking down that route. Next
I feel like
Generation.
you're not really that interested in this episode.
No, I am, but you keep talking about Next Generation and Spider-Man. I have no idea about any of them.
Well, people listening will know about these things.
Right, okay. We'll do a podcast on it one day.
McDougall died in 1991. He was 73. Paul Schneider wrote the episode. We've talked about him before in Battles of Terror, so if you want to hear about him, go and listen to that, because I'm not giving you it again.
Okay.
This was the second of his 2 episodes. Did an animated one as well. William Campbell played Trelane. He returns later on in a different role. Good. And showed up in Deep Space Nine as well.
Right.
He also voiced Trelane in a computer game, which I'll talk about a wee bit later on.
No, you won't.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
His other work included shows like Perry Mason. I noticed this week there's a new remake of Perry Mason.
Right.
Starting in the telly.
Is there? Who's playing Perry Mason?
I didn't see it long enough to know what was going on. Just saw the caption up at the end.
No one big?
I can't imagine.
Okay.
He was in things like The Streets of San Francisco, Quincy Emmy. He died in 2011. He was 87. Yeager was played by Richard Carlisle. He was a bit older, as we said during the episode. This was his only Star Trek appearance, but he was also in shows like Marcus Welby, MD, Brady Bunch and Kojak, and died in 2009 at the age of 95.
Yeah, all that decent innings.
LaSalle was played by Michael Barrier, who will return as LaSalle in a couple of further episodes.
Not sure if I was a fan of him, to be fair.
He's just like
you said LaSalle, is it
guy.
DeSalle, is it not?
LaSalle. Well, I've written LaSalle.
No, it's DeSalle.
DeSalle.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah, so yeah, he seemed to be just like generic guy from the front of the bridge. We've seen so many of them. Could have been Gary Mitchell if he hadn't gone to the barrier. It could have been Riley. It could have been...
Who was the one that hated Spock?
Bailey. It could have been, yes, the one that hated Spock from Balance of Terror.
Yeah.
Can't remember his name now. Probably Richie or something like that. Yeah. It's just generic. It's a different actor, but it's basically the same character.
Yeah.
Over and over again. Barrier gave up acting after 1969, having been in shows like this and My Favourite Martian and Bonanza. Went to law school, became a legal officer for the Coast Guard. Then he got into teaching after that. He's now 86 years old. Doesn't act.
No?
Nope. Vanita Wolf played Yeoman Ross. Doesn't appear in any more Star Trek. She was in things like The Monkees, Beverly Hillbillies. Died in 2014 at 69.
She was also in Playboy.
Was she?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that, but there you go.
There's quite a few actually been in Playboy.
It doesn't come up on IMDb, so I don't know.
It does.
Does it?
Yeah.
That's what section?
Trivia.
Okay. Barbara Babcock, Bart LaRue were the Green Blobs. Babcock is pretty famous, I think. People will know who she was. She was in Far and Away. She was in 5 Murder, She Wrote. 98 episodes of Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. She's 83 now. LaRue would appear, or at least he'll be heard, doing voices in 5 further Star Trek episodes. He also showed up on Brady Bunch, Mission Impossible, and Mannix, things like that, before he died before his time in 1990. He's just 57, had a heart attack. And I think he wasn't the first in his family to have a heart attack.
Okay.
From the trivia and IMDb that you want us to look at. That's unfortunate.
Right.
None of those folk have a Columbo connection. The episode does have one.
What's that?
So William Campbell is cast as Trelane based on a strong audition and the support of Gene Kuhn, who we talked about earlier on, the producer, but the casting director Joe D'Agosta, who was our Columbo connection last week, originally had another name in mind for the role, which was a Columbo alum, Roddy McDowell. People know him from Planet of the Apes and various other things.
Short fuse.
He also went on to miss out on roles in both The Next Generation and for one of the regular roles in Deep Space Nine. He auditioned for those and didn't get them.
He was in Fright Night.
Could you imagine him in this episode?
Definitely.
As the Squire? It'd be different, maybe more foppish. Tighter trousers.
Yeah.
Okay, trivia. One of my favourite memories of the Squire is when he shows up as the Baron of Gothos in the computer game Star Trek Judgment Rights, which was, his interest had moved on to World War II by then. It's a great game. Spent a lot of 1994 playing that one.
Did you?
William Campbell apparently dislocated his shoulder while they were filming the fight between Trelane and Kirk, but it popped back in when he jumped up. I think that was involved, though, in some of the delay in filming that annoyed Shatner. Some sources credit James Doohan with voicing one of the Green Blobs, but I don't think it was. Many of the oddities in Trelane's collection in the drawing room came from the Paramount prop department, obviously. A lot of them had featured in the films of Cecil B. DeMille, so you can go and watch some of those and look out for things. International titles, only a couple really stand out. The Germans go with Tödliche Spiele of Gothos, which is Deadly Games on Gothos, and our Japanese friends chose Gotosusei no Kaijin, which means Mysterious Man on the Planet Gothos.
Talking about the Japanese, we found out the other day there that for a period of time we were the Fawlty Towers podcast, which we previously produced, was #1 in Japan.
In the TV review section?
Yeah, don't know how.
Any of our Japanese listeners want to let us know what happened there, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. Big in Japan.
Big in Japan. Next week, 18th episode of season 1 is Arena, another memorable alien.
Sounds gladiatorial.
It does, and in the meantime, there's a new place you can review us. Our episodes now appear on IMDb. We could do with some ratings and reviews on there if you have an account. It'd be good if you like us. That'd be good to show up with some feedback on that platform as well. And we'll speak to you in 7 days' time.
Cheerio.
Bye.